Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's video on how to name your company. This is something that I found really difficult when I was naming my company, Cluster Consulting, just a couple of weeks ago. During that time, I was looking online for resources and blogs and videos just like this one, and I struggled to find something that was either recent and relevant or was completely nothing to do with me. So I found some blog posts from like 2011 which read as if they weren't recent, and I didn't feel a lot of resonation with them. And I also found a few videos, but they weren't really what I was after. So now I'm through the relatively painful process of naming my company, I thought, why not create this quick video to help future me's in the future, or future people who are going to also be struggling with coming up with the right name for their company. So the first thing to note is that naming a company is really hard, but it's a critical step in starting your own business. Without a name, you can't apply to become a business. It's a real catch-22. And it's worth remembering also that both the names and the associated branding can change over time. However, it will take focus away from your core business in the future, because you'll be focused on rebranding or changing the company name, potentially confusing your customers, and overall just taking your core focus away from delivering value and growing your business into something that's kind of more housekeepy. So I urge you to take the time you need in this step to name your business properly. As I mentioned, I've recently gone through this process myself of naming a company. Eventually, I settled on Cluster Consulting. I found it a very difficult process, and again, hopefully this video is useful for you. Good luck, you've totally got this. Just a quick ask before we dive into the content. If you could help me convince the YouTube algorithm that this video is actually good, you could, if you wanted to, click the like button and also subscribe. I'm not going to be adding any of those annoying banners every 10 seconds or something like that anymore. I've had some clear feedback that that's not what people want, and that's fine. But it would really help me if you click the like button, and also if you're enjoying this content to also click the subscribe button. I produce videos like this one every week on a Wednesday. Okay, so let's dive into the content. I've split these tips that I have into two different categories. Tips in generating an idea in the first place, and then also tips once you have an idea, or once you think you have an idea, what to do then. Because I saw this as two different stages in the process of naming my company. So let's take them one at a time. Firstly, here's the top tips I had in generating an idea in the first place. Firstly, avoid limiting yourself when choosing a business name. There aren't many reasons to arbitrarily limit yourself in your business name. What do I mean by limiting yourself? For example, if you are a supercar dealership, there's no real reason to name yourself South Dakota Supercars. It doesn't make much sense, because you're limiting yourself in the future if you want to start selling supercars outside of South Dakota to think about your business name again. If you sell cable ties, I don't know why you would, but if you do, there's no real reason to name your company White Cable Ties for Sale in London. That's a slogan, that's not a company name. In naming your company that, you've also limited yourself quite arbitrarily based on what type of cable ties you can sell and where you can sell them. So White Cable Ties and in London. Both of these examples with South Dakota Supercars and White Cable Ties in London, you are potentially limiting yourself in the future and the growth of your business. So try and not do that. The second tip I have for you is around using a name mashup service. So I use a service called Name Combinator. I've dropped a link in the video description below for that, to automatically mash up different words that I gave the service together. I found this really useful in kind of trying to find a slightly different angle to a potential name. One example of how I found this useful is by adding in lots of slightly misspelled words. For example, if there's a common misspelling of a word, you can add that in as well as the correct spelling of a word into a service like Name Combinator, I found this really useful in getting a broad range of options together very, very quickly. The third tip I have in generating an idea or some ideas is avoid relying on initials. Often, people look at companies such as IBM and say, well, if they can create a company based on a set of initials, then so can I. And yes, you might be able to. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. However, a company such as IBM is almost allowed to get away with having initials because they are a billion-dollar company and they're basically an institution now in their own right. If you try and start a company today, so you're a startup or a scale-up business, you're in a completely different space than an IBM because they're the other side of the equation at $1 billion+. So you're going to have a completely different experience for you to try and attempt to build a brand and a business around a set of initials. It's just going to make it slightly harder for you. The fourth tip I have for you around the top tips in order to generate the idea itself is around using the free advertising tools. I should mention the keyword there being free. Don't pay for these tools, at least not right now. You don't need to. So I personally used the Google AdWords tool and also the Facebook Ads Manager tool to give me other ideas. So I used both the Google AdWords and Facebook Ad Manager tools to give me other examples of similar keywords related to possible ideas that I had. So for example, in the consulting space, I could add in the word consulting or business strategy or whatever it might have been, or marketing or whatever, and it would give me similar keywords and approximated traffic based on those keywords. I used that in order to help me understand what real customers and potential users of my business might be searching for at the moment, and therefore that helps me easily set up campaigns in the future to drive people to the places that I want them to be. Okay, so the final tip I have for you in generating an idea is around repeatability. You're going to be saying the name of your company for the next couple of months, couple of years, well into the future perhaps. So try not to jump on what's really hot and popular right now. There might be some cool words or there might be some memes that make people laugh and are super relevant right now today. Unless you want your business to sour quicker than old milk, try not to name your business something that's cool and hip right now or is on trend right now, because trends will come and they will go. It doesn't feel like it right now because you might be able to ride the high of how many people are searching for those cool words or those memes or whatever it might be. That will quickly die off and you'll find yourself in a really tricky situation. In terms of repeatability, there's another angle to this as well. I mentioned that you will be saying the name of your company for months and years in the future, so get used to saying it. I stood in front of a mirror and I said possible ideas to myself multiple times, sort of 10, 20, 30 times in a row. And if I found myself getting a bit bored of saying it or finding that it was hard to enunciate some of those words, that helped me narrow down the amount of possible ideas that I had. Because if I said it only 10 times and I found it difficult to say on the 10th time, then perhaps it wasn't the right business name for me. The first tip for once you have some ideas is to conduct a very detailed search on the internet for any and all references of that brand name or those words. For example, when I had wanted to settle on cluster consulting, I thought it was cool, I was able to say it to myself in the mirror, I checked with some of my friends and they were like, yeah, that sounds like a good name. The next step was to find out whether it existed anywhere else online. In order to do this quickly and in a very detailed manner, I searched for the brand name or the company name that I wanted with quotation marks around it. Adding quotation marks will only search for those specific words, and this helps narrow down a potentially very broad search into what's hyper relevant for you. In my example, I found this really useful because there were some old websites from maybe 10 or 15 years ago which were still on the internet but had no relevance to today and what was going on. For example, they might have been old businesses or old blog posts that people have written. but it helped me understand had that name been used before and for what purposes. That would have been very difficult for me to find had it have been just searching the name itself without the quotation marks, because the search engines such as Google would be only looking for what's relevant now, and given these sites hadn't been updated for say 10-15 years or so, they wouldn't have been anywhere near the top of the search rankings, and it would have been really hard for me to find them. Okay, so the second tip I have for you, once you have an idea or a set of ideas, is to search for any existing IP or patents or copyright against them. Don't be put off if a business in a completely different sector or a completely different country has your potential business name. It's not the end of the world, specifically if they do something that's wildly different to you. For example, if you are an artist and there is a mining company that's been around for 15 years that happens to have the same name as you, that's not the end of the world. Well, it's not if there is not any legal reason for that to be the end of the world. So, in order for you to check, in the US, there's a service offered by the US Patent and Trade Office, I think is what it's called. I've added a link in the description for below if you're based over in the US. In the UK, there's a company name checker offered by Companies House, which is currently in beta at the moment. I've also linked that in the video description below. I personally found the UK company name checker, which is in beta at the moment, as a great tool, as it searched for both exact matches of this phrase or this potential business name, but also similar business names too. So it was a bit of a fuzzy search, and it enabled me to find the right name that wasn't too similar to anything else that was currently around. So you've gone through the process of finding potential names, you've narrowed it down to a small handful of them, and you've whittled that list down even further by conducting detailed searches and also checking for any legal reasons such as patents, IP or copyright, which might bar you from using that term. Now's the fun part. You've got to find a domain name. Most companies have a .com domain name. You don't need one. There's no legal reason why it has to be .com. There's this sort of esoteric reason, I guess, as to why. I think it's to do with consumer confidence, because if you have a very peculiar or hard to know domain, perhaps it's .ch or something, because perhaps that spells out the end of your company name. That might be cool and hip for a certain section of possible users, but you're going to have other users who might type out your company name.com and just end up going to the wrong place. So to avoid this, ideally get the .com domain name. In my example, I had to modify the domain name slightly in order to find one that was free and available for me to buy. So in my example, clusterconsulting.com was taken. I think someone was sitting on the domain name and wanted some insane amount of money for it, which I obviously said no. So instead, I went with theclusterconsulting.com. So I added THE or the at the start, and that enabled me to snap up a .com domain name for super cheap. Be playful with how you word your potential business. Perhaps adding the or a similar type acronym at the start might be really useful. Maybe a hyphen in the middle, but be careful when it becomes a bit too much. Say your business name is multiple words, having a hyphen between each one, or God forbid, please don't do this and add the year. I've seen company domain names which have like 1993.com or whatever. Like, please don't do this. It's a terrible idea. The final tip I have for you is about branding. At this point, you have a possible name that you want to take forward. You've done all of the relevant checks that you can, and you think it's the right one for you. Now's time to focus on your business branding. I used a service called Colors or Coolers. I don't know how, I think it's an American misspelling of colours. I apologise if I mispronounced that, but there's a link in the description below. And I used this service to help me understand which colour palettes work together. And that gave me a really great starter for 10 to help me build my brand, because I had a strong foundation of both a name and also a set of colours that worked well together. Don't worry about getting the branding absolutely right the first time, because you can iterate on this as your company starts growing. Branding is fairly flexible over time compared to your business name. Alright, so there you had it, the top tips which I found really helpful and useful when I was trying to choose my business name. Let me know whether they worked for you. I'm interested to know how you get on. Let me know in the comments. Have a lovely day. Bye.